Whoa, this is big. The deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada is getting sued alongside Rebel News' Ezra Levant and the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs. And who filed the lawsuit? The former head of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, who all of them called anti-Semitic. In June, Birju Dattani became the first Muslim and person of color to be appointed Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And 4 days after he was supposed to start in that role, he resigned. This, he says, happened amid an online and media smear campaign, which, quote, grossly mischaracterized him as an anti-Semitic terrorist supporter. I listened to the press conference, reached out to the folks being sued, got my hands on an independent investigation into the allegations and more. So, let's talk about it. Now, the accusation of anti-Semitism has been weaponized by pro-Israel groups really recklessly in the last year, especially at a time when real anti-Semitism has been rising, and horrifically so. But as white nationalist groups and far-right extremists especially have been increasingly emboldened in their online anti-Semitic rhetoric, a lot of folks who claim to care about this rising anti-Semitism are instead focused on lobbing accusations of it at people who criticized Israel, which has spent more than a year conducting what Amnesty International and a United Nations Special Committee found is a genocide. Take, for example, how a bunch of people online freaked out when protesters showed up at a Toronto mall and basically implied that Canada was like falling, but it turns out it was a 10-minute protest. Or when folks claimed it was anti-Semitic to protest and boycott the Jewish-owned bookstore Indigo, when in reality, its CEO, Heather Reisman, has an entire charity dedicated to providing a monetary incentive for lone soldiers to join the IDF because afterwards she gives them a scholarship. So this is the bad faith landscape we're dealing with when Birju Dattani was appointed the chief of the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And immediately, Conservative Deputy Leader Melissa Lantsman and others condemned his appointment. Ezra Levant called Dattani a, quote, anti-Semitic terrorism supporter. CIJA said he had an association with individuals and groups linked to listed terrorist entities and a history of anti-Semitic remarks. And Lantsman said he has a, quote, long history of anti-Semitic diatribes and called him, quote, this anti-Semitic commissioner. So what exactly did Dattani do that prompted this aggressive campaign? Well, at the time, the government hired an independent third party to investigate all of these allegations. As part of that investigation, they looked at, quote, all publicly accessible information related to these allegations. The final report that came out of all of that, which the government published on July 29th, 2024, highlights 14 different allegations. These include that he had tweeted comparing Palestinians to prisoners in the Warsaw Ghetto in World War II. He had appeared on several panels that had titles including the word apartheid, which makes total sense as a topic for academics and experts in human rights to be discussing. In my undergrad, I actually double majored in journalism and human rights, and this was an issue we discussed in my classes all the time. Another allegation was that he at one point was on a panel where one of his co-panelists was actually a member of an Islamic fundamentalist organization that had been banned in the UK. But this is something that Dattani said he wasn't aware of when he appeared on the panel because that's not how the guy was described or introduced to him. And he assumed that the student association behind the panel had done proper vetting. Dattani had also once, as a student, written a draft paper interrogating terrorism as a strategy. But again, that was an interrogation, like an academic exploration. And he told the investigators that he finds terrorism, quote, morally repugnant. So to summarize a lot of these allegations, a guy with a long career in the human rights space talked about, wrote about, and studied the issue of Israel-Palestine. And like several credible human rights organizations also did when they've previously explored the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians, ended up with some criticisms of the Israeli government's actions. But look, don't just take my word for it. Here is what the independent third-party investigator found. Quote, based on Mr. Dattani's evidence, the scholarship that was reviewed and provided, we cannot find that Mr. Dattani harbored or harbors any beliefs that would be characterized as anti-Semitic or that he has demonstrated any biases, conscious or unconscious, towards Jews or Israelis. While some may take issue with Mr. Dattani's scholarship that we have been provided, the sources he relies upon in that scholarship and his criticism of the state of Israel, he has not demonstrated any intentions or actions that suggest he is anti-Semitic or has beliefs that could be characterized as anti-Semitic. Throughout the interview, Mr. Dattani was careful to criticize the actions of the State of Israel and not the Israeli people. They also said he has a, quote, high degree of self-awareness and sensitivity to the current challenges faced by the Jewish community in Canada, as well as a commitment to continue to learn about those challenges in the future. The only stuff that they really took issue with was the fact that there was a period of time when Dattani used a different first name, and they felt like he didn't disclose that adequately to the government. He did actually put that different name that he used in the documents if you look at them, but he said that he forgot to put a comma between that name and another name, and so that created some confusion. But the investigators didn't find that comma explanation to be credible. But it's weird because, like, if the biggest issue is that he had, for a period of time, used a different name, and that's why the government didn't know about a lot of the stuff that I described to you in advance, I mean, the conclusion of the investigation, a full investigation into all the allegations against him, was that he had zero anti-Semitic biases, unconscious or conscious. So why didn't the government come out and fully defend him? And why did he resign? Well, according to the director of the Center for Free Expression based out of Toronto Metropolitan University, who brought Dattani on as a senior fellow in September, Dattani's resignation reflects his integrity as someone, quote, who did not want any cloud of suspicion about his commitment to human rights for all. All of that context brings us to today, where he is suing Deputy Conservative Leader Melissa Lantsman, who, after the investigation that I just spent all that time explaining to you, was released, continued to attack him as anti-Semitic. So he's seeking $650,000 from Lantsman, as well as a declaration that she defamed him. He's also suing the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, which, after the investigation was published, said he had a history of anti-Semitic remarks, and he's suing them for $600,000, and he's also seeking a declaration from CIJA that they publicly defamed him. And lastly, he's seeking that same declaration from Rebel Media's Rebel commander, Ezra Levant, along with $800,000. Now, I reached out to all three of them for comment, but CIJA and Lantsman did not get back to me. They did, however, get back to the National Post. Shocker. CIJA told the Post, quote, we received the statement of claim and are reviewing. What we said is sourced and factual. While Lantsman said she, quote, will vigorously defend herself against these baseless claims and that, quote, the controversy surrounding the appointment of Mr. Dattani by the Liberal government is a matter of public record. The rebel commander himself, however, did respond to me. Ezra Levant said that he has made a lengthy public statement online and told me that this is a, quote, slap suit designed to silence legitimate criticism of a high-profile public official on a matter of public interest. He's also fundraising off of it. So we'll see what happens in this case, but it is a really interesting one, especially when you consider how many people have faced allegations that they're anti-Semitic for criticizing the state of Israel and its actions. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump is publicly stating his intention to escalate ethnic cleansing in Gaza, stating that the United States would take it over and move out the Palestinian population, which is against international humanitarian law. And he made this comment while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was right beside him. Speaking personally, I would have some big concerns if the chief commissioner of a major human rights body in Canada hadn't engaged meaningfully on one of the biggest human rights crises of our time. But that's just me. What do you think of all this?